Well, welcome to another edition of Word in Your Ear. And this one is about a proper unsung hero who signed or helped shape the careers of a huge number of really, really wonderful acts and never quite got the credit he deserved. Acts like the Bonzos, Beefheart and J.J. Cale, Hawkwind, Nick Lowe, Costello, Creed's Clearwater, Feel Good Stranglers, Stone Roses, to name just a few. And this is a man with a charmed life, and and it's an extraordinary story. And he was, of course, Andrew Lauder. And our old pal Mick Houghton has just written this terrific memoir about him called Happy Trails. Mick, very nice to see you.
And you too.
And so, firstly, Andrew was more, I mean, he's not that widely known outside the music industry. It's partly why we're doing it, actually. But he was more than just an A&R man. He didn't sign these groups. I mean, he was involved in all sorts of other areas that contributed to their success, wasn't he?
He was, but, I think that's part of the role of the A&R man. The A&R man doesn't just sign bands. He takes them from from signing them to recording them, right through to marketing the records at the end of that.
No, but in his case, graphic design and all sorts of stuff, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think Andrew was aware that, to some extent, a lot of his bands, they weren't fashionable bands. And, if they didn't get played by John Peel, nobody was going to know they existed, probably.
Yeah.
So he had to come up with ways of bringing them to people's attentions. And one of those was to have great album covers, brilliant album covers. And the other one was, I think, to come up with ingenious marketing ideas. And in that in particular, he was well ahead of the game. I mean, if you look at some of the things that came in with new wave independent record labels, and particularly Stiff, I mean, Andrew had been doing those kind of things for years. But, I think it was just any way that he could that was kind of relevant to that band. He would try and find ways of getting people to be aware of them.
We should make it clear, he's not in the past tense, is he?
No, he's not.
But he's just very publicity shy.
He's incredibly publicity shy. Richard Williams has written a lovely foreword to this book. And at one point, Richard was an A&R man himself, and he said that Andrew was the only A&R man that he knew that really, didn't want to get noticed himself. He wanted to remain in the background. And the other weird thing with Andrew is that it's like he would say things to me like, the only thing that matters to me is the music, which sounds like a terrible cliche.
Yeah.
But it's actually true. He was just totally genuine in that way. And, another thing that Richard points out is that, in a long career as an A&R man, he never once, I think, had a producer credit. He wasn't interested in producing it. And he never slipped a kind of dodgy, self-written B-side
yes.
out there.
No, absolutely.
For Bob. So he was the real deal, as they say.
We should tell the story.
Alive.
Yeah, absolutely. We should, early on, there's the story, obviously, of him coming down the age of 16 and getting a job in the music industry. Just tell that story, because it's absolutely extraordinary, isn't it? He just decides to go to the music papers and just knock on their doors, 1964, see if there are any jobs.
Yeah, but basically, he left school at 16, and he knew then that basically he wanted a job in the music industry. He didn't know how or what that entailed, but he just had this dream of somehow coming to London and getting a job in the music business. And part of that was, he was partly inspired, by Andrew Oldham. Andrew Lauder, went to Marlborough School, public school, which was the same school that Andrew Oldham went to. I think Andrew Lauder arrived there the term after Andrew Oldham had been expelled. But in the time that Andrew Lauder was there, the whole beat group, the whole Merseybeat thing kicked off, and then the R&B boom that followed, and Andrew was totally obsessed with that. And at school, I think the thing he was best known for was being the guy that had this amazing record collection, and you could go to the day room and he'd play all these records. And if you wanted to know something about music, you went and asked Andrew. So he left school or asked his parents to leave, convinced his parents that he should leave school at 16. And he left Marlborough, oddly enough, with the same one O-level that Andrew Oldham, an O-level in English literature, I think, which is very useful. And I think he used Andrew as an example throughout 1964, well, after he left school, saying, look what this guy's done. You don't need credentials to be in the music business. You just go down to London and get a job.
He was right. He was right.
Yeah, because he just literally knocked on the door and said, got any jobs? And that afternoon got a job. Was it Southern Music Publishers?
He says he didn't even realise he'd kind of, he like you say, he thought, I can write a bit, I know a lot about music. And he did go to Melody Maker, couldn't get him through the door, went to Record Mirror, there's nobody there, went to Denmark Street, which was where the NME, that was the address he had for the NME. And they moved. So he didn't really know what to do. So he kind of crossed the road. And the reason he thinks he kind of staggered in or stumbled into the Southern Music publishing offices was that the window had a display of Pretty Things, sheet music. He was a massive Pretty Things fan. So he kind of wandered into this office and just blurted out, I'm looking for a job. And the guy there said, well, that's really odd because we hadn't advertised, but we're looking for somebody. And within like 2 hours, he was sat at his desk writing out sheet music sales for the Pretty Things and the Rolling Stones, who were the Southern Music represented Essex Music. And so he basically became an invoice clerk, which was an incredibly boring job as it happens, but it just plonked him in the middle of Denmark Street.
Which was an incredibly exciting place to be, was it? Regent Sound Studio was just across the road where the Stones recorded their first album. Yeah. I think on that first day, various group, Clem Catini and various of his heroes actually wandered into the office, didn't they?
Oh, yeah, you couldn't believe it. That afternoon, it's like Clem Catini was struggling to get his drum kit through the door, and Andrew got to help him in. And probably not that many people would have recognised Clem Catini. In fact, there you go, I'll prove this. I have a photo of Johnny Kidd and the Pirates here.
Yeah.
And I was looking at it thinking, which one's Clem Catini?
I think I know.
Do you? Because I didn't think he was in it. I thought I got the wrong lineup.
Oh, okay. I thought that it was the guy in the white trousers, centre. I thought. I may be wrong. Somebody will tell.
I don't know. Anyway, that's a picture of Johnny Kidd and the Pirates, who actually are a thread that runs through this book, actually. But so, yeah, Clem comes in and... About half an hour later, there's a guy staggering in with a big double bass, and that turns out to be Bruce Licorice Locking, who was the bass player that replaced Jet Harris in the Shadows. So, I think at that point he's wandered off the street and got a job, and all these people are coming in. He's thinking, what's going on? And as the months went by or weeks went by, Donovan came in, and it transpires that Donovan had recorded Catch the Wind in the basement studios at Southern. Mike Vernon was producing the Artwoods, who were one of his favourite bands. And a month or so later, Jeff Beck came in and said, Eric's left the Yardbirds and I've just taken over. And I think 2 weeks later, Andrew was at the Marquee and saw the first gig that Jeff Beck played with the Yardbirds.
That's one of the really interesting things about this book is that it goes from those days when music was a village, wasn't it, really? It was a village around Denmark Street. There were about 40 people involved in it, largely, and they all played in each other's bands. Elton John was working down the street, wasn't he? Oh, a bit red white as he was, Yeah,
that was Miller's music was actually opposite. It was either above or beneath Regent Sound. Yeah. And the two of them would, and it wasn't part of Andrew's job, but sometimes he'd have to take all the sheet music to the post office, in a sort of a railway porter's trolley kind of thing. And he'd be kind of rushing to get to the post office, and Elton John would be running down the other side of the street with the same kind of trolley, filled with Mills music, sheet music. So, it was an incredible street. I mean, you had agents there. Most of the publishers were there. Larry Page had an office there. Even, which I loved when I found out, even the guy that sold the newspapers, whose name I've forgotten, basically had been in the Arsenal's cup winning side, but it kind of was down on his uppers because he developed a bit of a gambling habit. And there he was selling the newspapers that he used to pick the wrong horses from. So it was just full of all these characters that.
So he kind of scuffles around, does he? He does all kinds of things. He gets involved in managing bands, all kinds of things, learning all the time. But I suppose the key thing is when he gets a job at Liberty United Artists, which is an American company, decides it's going to set up an office in the UK. And he's there when they place the ad, don't they, in the music papers, saying we're looking for talent. And that produced Elton John and Bernie Taupin and so forth, didn't it?
Oh yeah, that was like 6 months after he joined, and that ad was actually placed by a guy called Ray Williams, who was the A&R man at the time. And I mean, Andrew at the time didn't really have a job description. He just got a job, and it was pretty vague. I mean, he was a record plugger apart from anything else. But no, it was Ray Williams who placed the ad, and the ad basically said Liberty wants talent. And that was the ad where, Elton John and Bernie Taupin both wrote in, and Ray was the guy that thought, oh, this guy can write music, this guy can write songs, and he was the guy that put them together.
It's still an absolutely extraordinary, serendipitous thing, that isn't it?
I mean, interestingly, Liberty actually did demos with Elton, and turned him down. So,
Well,
but Liberty is an interesting thing because they had failed to sign on their own doorstep in San Francisco. Jefferson Airplane, Country Joe and the Dead, Quicksand, the Silver Messengers, all sorts of people. So his job really was to try and make them fashionable in the UK, was to find exciting new groups. Was that right?
It was. I mean, I think I think Andy was just really disappointed because he was he absolutely loved that. In this country, he probably knew more about the San Francisco scene than anybody. He was obsessed with it. So I think it was pretty galling for him that Liberty was weren't signing any of those really good bands. But I think what happened, Andrew obviously didn't really have much to do with American signings, although he did later license Fantasy Records, so he brought Creedence Clearwater Revival to Liberty. But I think the great thing about Liberty was that the guy that ran it, a guy called Bob Rydorf, basically had a really refreshing attitude. I mean, his attitude towards, once Andrew became an A&R man, his attitude was basically go out, find some bands, sign them and sell some records, which is kind of what it's about. Yeah. But the other thing about that Liberty Wants Talent ad was that others that applied to Liberty as a result of that include the Idle Race, which was Jeff Lynne's band, the Bonzo Dog Band, and Family. So they all came knocking on the door, and they all got signed by Liberty. I mean, Andrew was very disappointed because he worked on the first Family album, Music in a Doll's House, only for them to make. They did one single with Liberty, and then they went off and signed to Warner Brothers. So he was responsible for that album, for the artwork and the label copy, and then the carpet was pulled for Run.
So the biggest success of that lot was the Bonzos, wasn't it? Which is the most unlikely kind of success.
But actually the other success was Andrew was a massive blues enthusiast, and he was very keen on Canned Heat. So but obviously they had a number of big selling records, top 10 singles. Yeah. I mean, in a way, same as for Creedence, he didn't sign those bands, but he had the nous to say.
He licensed them, didn't he? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he had the nous to say we should release this record over here.
Well, Proud Mary being a hit over here would not have happened surely if he hadn't got behind them.
I think it would have happened, but it was just more that if where the kind of the charmed life comes into it, and the luck that Andrew seems to have is that he found out through a contact at another publishing house, Burlington Music. He found out that Creedence Clearwater were out of contract. I mean, before it was known, he just found out just by chance because he was talking to the guy at Burlington Music. So he went to the American company and said, I think Creedence Clearwater no longer have a deal in UK and Europe. Can you look into it for us? And they did. And the next day, the head of international in America said, "Well, we've just licensed the whole label for you." So, that's where the luck comes in. He had.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, he only knew about Creedence Clearwater because he was possibly the only person in this country who had copies of the Gollywog single.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, the worst named
Embarrassingly titled.
He got one of those, didn't he, from Saul's Ants, who was the man who owned Fantasy Records, when actually crawls over a stack of records and gets it for him. Yeah. Well, one of the things I love about this book is the detail, Mick. And you forgive me if I read a bit of this out here. Moving forward to, he's involved in the Brinsley Schwarz, the great, extraordinary, when hype was invented.
Oh, it's a fantastic story.
The story of the plane where they took a plane load of journalists over to New York to see
Fillmore East.
An unknown group, Brinsley Schwarz, play the Fillmore East. And you've actually got the list of the people who were on that plane. And that's the thing I love. It says you've got Charlie Gillett, obviously writing for Record Mirror, Pete Frame from Zigzag, Jonathan Green from Friends, Mark Williams from IT, Keith Alton from The Enemy, Richard Williams, we were talking about earlier, from The Melody Maker, Richard Neville from Oz, and there were journalists from The Guardian, Evening Standard, Daily Mail and The Mirror there, plus five Melody Maker competition winners and their plus ones.
Yeah.
It's that kind of detail that...
I know, but and the ones you didn't read out was that there were people there from the Jewish Chronicle.
Yes,
that's right.
And I think Titbits and Reveille.
I'm amazed nobody's made a comedy film about that.
Oh God, it would be
that
brilliant.
Weekend. Wouldn't it be good?
Because they're in a nutshell, they're flown out and due to a series of disasters, they just don't quite get to the gig on time, do they? They've been flown out to be able to see this thing. He's supporting Van Morrison, I think, at Brinsley Schwarz. Oh. And they kind of missed the gig, don't they?
Well, actually, the flight was delayed for about 5 hours in the end. So they basically arrived at the Fillmore just at 8 o'clock, which was when Brinsley was due to go on. So, to be honest with you, I think at that point, the impression I get is that half the people that were on that plane
were pissed.
Were so pissed they couldn't stand. They didn't even go to the gig, actually, did they? Just hey, we're in New York.
They were in New York. They thought, let's just go out of the town, And I think actually one of the things I found, and when I was just looking through stuff for this, was I found the guest list for that flight.
Oh, really?
All right.
And, one of the names on it, and I can't believe he was on the flight. One of the names on it was Terry Wogan.
Oh God, no!
Oh. God.
Which isn't that bizarre, because one of the other names on it was Jonathan Rouse.
That would make sense. And
his camera.
Yeah.
But, so we'll never know. Did Terry Wogan actually go on that flight?
It's a movie, I'll tell you. It's a comedy film. It's a great British comedy, that is.
That's a great idea. So, Mick, you were going to dig out some albums. You said you had a few kind of key albums that you had thought told the story. What have you got there? Tell us what they are for people who can't see it, are just listening.
In the light of what I was saying at the beginning about coming up with ways to get his band's notice. One of them was samplers. Everybody did that.
Yeah.
And he did two essentially blues samplers or blues underground samplers. One was called Gutbucket.
I've got that.
That was Hapsash,
with a pig on the cover. No, I don't. Is Hapsash on there?
Is it Hapsash? I thought it was, maybe.
It's got Wine, Women and Whiskey on there by Papa Lightfoot.
Canned Heat, Beef Arts on there, I think, isn't he?
Yeah.
Give me that harp, was it? Yeah.
Yeah. And for some strange reason, the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band are on there as well. But,
they had a name that sounded like they ought to be a blues band.
Yeah.
I think you remember that whenever I used to go and visit Andrew, one of the great things about visiting Andrew was you always came away with samples of records, which you did in those days. There always seemed to be a Nitty Gritty Dirt Band in there somewhere.
Yes, because they were never popular in this country.
No, never. Shame, but they weren't. Anyway, then there was a Son of Gutbucket.
Son of Gutbucket.
Yes.
Which actually is a bit more underground because it's got Roy Harper on it.
Yeah.
Band, Ainsley Dunbar Retaliation, Ian Anderson's Country Blues Band. Obviously everybody was doing samples then. But one of the things that Andrew did, which was slightly different, was the Greasy Truckers Party.
Oh, right, yes.
So that was an album recorded, where was it, the Roundhouse, was it?
It was a double album.
Brinsley Schwarz, yeah.
Recorded at the Roundhouse. And one of the bands, Byzantium, didn't get to play because there was a power cut. It was during the
That's so 70s.
But fortunately for Andrew, Hawkwind, Brinsley Schwarz and Man all got to play. So you've got this double album that sold for £1.50. And I mean, one of the bands that Andrew was struggling to get any attention to was Man, who made two pretty awful albums with Dawn label before he signed it. And
all albums on the Dawn label were terrible.
I'm not going to argue with that.
It's a sweeping statement. The hell's good. Anyway, carry on.
It is. It's one of those truths. Man with this band that the press hated. But they were huge in Germany. They were big in Germany. In Germany, they played to like 3,000 people. They come back here and they'd be in the Dog and Duck and playing to 6 people. And Andrew signed them. He didn't discover them. So this is where A&R men, find bands in very odd ways. Andrew signed Man because he was looking for a new flat, and the guy that was letting the flat was Barry Marshall, who managed Man, and the guy was saying, we got round to talking about what do you do for a living, and Andrew told him what he did, and Barry goes, that's funny, I'm in the music business too, and I managed this band called Man, and Andrew's immediately, oh shit, I hate that band, But in the end, they got talking, and I think Barry, told him that was a really different band now, but the taste. So basically, he decided to sign Man, having never seen them play live, on the basis of a reputation that they were this fantastic live band who now sounded more like Quicksilver Messenger Service than anything else.
Yeah, they did.
So anyway, basically he signs them, but within the press, everyone hated Man because they were on Dawn. And it was only through the one track on this album, which was a sidelong version of a song called Spunk Rock, that suddenly people went, actually, this band's all right.
This is the great coat days of rock and roll. This is when you had a track called Spunk Rock, So, I'm back in the Roundhouse already, Mick, when you're talking about this stuff.
Yeah.
What you got there?
And one of the other great stories about the Roundhouse gig was that because there was a power cut, before Hawkwind came on, everyone had to leave the venue. But even in those days, health and safety reasons.
Yeah.
But when they all filed back in, there were about 400 more people who came in than left, Anyway, it was just a great, with Man, once that was a success, he then made another live album called Live with the Pageant Moons, and then he did this.
I've got that.
A gatefold, double album gatefold 10-inch.
Yes.
Which is not only Man, but it's also got Ducks Deluxe.
Deke Leonard's on there, isn't he?
And Dave Edmunds even plays on it. But in terms of gimmicky sleeves, this is my favourite, and I don't know if this is Man's.
Oh, oh, right, yes.
And I have to.
It's a pop-up, isn't it?
It can be a map or pyramid.
It's a map of
Wales.
Wales.
Yes, that's right.
Man's rock map of Wales.
Yes.
How much would that have cost?
Could they have made a profit on that record?
No.
Seriously.
But they couldn't have done. And this is the thing. I mean, the other band that, probably been, I think the Groundhogs may have been the most successful album, the band that Andrew signed. Again, most people had no time for them whatsoever, and thought they were just a pretty average blues band. But
I'm not having that. I loved them.
But the other band was Hawkwind, and Hawkwind had the most extraordinary sleeves.
Yeah, they did.
Which were all designed by this guy called by Barney Bubbles, and
Yeah.
And I found an ad from the Melody Maker, which gives you a sense of the In Search of Space album. If you can see this, that was how the album folded out. And I'd never noticed that on the back you have this, which is an ad to the Groundhogs. So if you can see that.
Amazing.
I mean, it's like you say, they must have cost a fortune, these things, but I think it was a time, and Andrew was very lucky that his boss at UA pretty much just let him get on with it and trusted his judgment.
But don't you think that was also, the interesting thing is, this is also a time when the record business is a branch of the packaged goods business. And so people got so excited. If you're a Man fan or whatever, your excitement was going to the shop, buying that, taking it home, and getting it out and looking at it. It's like people do unboxing videos nowadays on YouTube, don't they? When they buy a new computer or the new anything, people used to do that with records. That's why that was quite a good investment, because a Man fan wanted a cover that was slightly zanier than the other guys, the Deep Purples or whoever else he might have bought.
But even the fact that you just go into a record shop and flick through the racks and certain albums would jump out at you.
It was a drama in a record shop. The classic case is not one of Andrew Lauder's, but we often think about this around about the same time, is Pink Floyd's Wish You Were Here, which you ripped off the black shrink wrap and then you never saw it again. That was the drama. You did it once. You know what I mean? Yeah. And then the record was never the same again. But it didn't matter. You'd done it,
Just as he destroyed the Banana or the Velvet Underground.
That's it. Yeah.
Yes. It's extraordinary. So moving forward, he signed Dr. Feelgood.
He did, yeah.
Well, Dr. Feelgood's a classic example of those groups that he never thought were really going to do anything commercially, but he believed in them. But so he must have been astonished when they actually finished up. Didn't they have a number one album at one point?
Stupidity was a number one album.
Yeah.
Again, Andrew's ingenuity was such that, and I think he was the first person to do it in this country. They shrink wrapped a 7-inch single in with the album. And I think that's why, I think they knew it was going to sell. The reason it went to number one was because...
was because of that. It was.
Yeah.
Which a year later, everyone was doing it. Everyone was
with Stiff Records and everybody was doing it. They were all getting into it. But before that, the other thing he did with Dr. Feelgood, and I can remember being gobsmacked by this at the time, first album in mono.
Yeah.
Proudly.
Nobody was putting out records in mono. It was like, they just couldn't believe anybody was going to do that. Now it seems just, obvious.
He talks about this because apparently Wilco didn't want to say that the album was in mono because he thought it was a gimmick. I don't want a gimmick. I don't want people to think we're a gimmick band making records in mono. But he had to put mono on it.
Yeah.
Because of the page description ads. You couldn't not put it on. Well, that's what he told Wilco anyway. So he was quite a tricky customer.
Yeah.
What else you got there? You got he was very high ahead of the game with the kind of German electronic groups, wasn't he? Can.
Yeah.
Long before, that was before the whole kind of Kraftwerk thing. That's right, yeah.
No, he was. And Can's another one of those ones where he didn't actually sign Can. The German office of Liberty Records And one of the reasons Andrew was more interested in the German label than the French label was that the German office was run by a guy called Ziggy Locke. And Andrew knew about Ziggy Locke because he used to run Star Club Records, which put out a lot of the more obscure Merseybeat albums.
Yeah, yeah.
One of the things about Andrew, he was a real record, you'd say today he's a vinyl junkie. And it's like, but he somehow his kind of knowledge, because he knew all these obscure names and obscure connections, it kind of drew him to things that possibly other people wouldn't have even taken any notice of. But as far as the Can and the German bands are concerned, like I say, he didn't sign them, but he had to now release them in this country. And at that time, I think Kraftwerk, Tangerine Dream, a lot of the other contemporary German bands weren't getting releases in this country.
Yeah,
and I think it was till Virgin came along in 1973 that they put out things like Faust and Tangerine Dream. And he kind of broke that open. He broke open the whole idea that basically, German music wasn't something of Eurovision. He kind of bands coming from Europe were kind of respectable suddenly.
Yeah.
I think the weird thing I find with Can is that after the first album, which had some basis in rock music, they made consistently kind of weird albums that people. I know that people of my generation didn't really get them.
No,
it was a generation after.
It was.
Yeah, that's true.
For whom those albums were sort of like, I've got the Can album.
It wasn't. It wasn't the Beatles generation, was it?
It's funny. It's people like John Lydon and a lot of kind of punk rock people were just obsessed with the work. Marquis Smith, I think, really loved them.
People like Julian Cope, Mary
Julian Cope, exactly.
So it was that generation that got. In fact, one guy, Andrew didn't say this, but a friend of mine who was in marketing at UA told me that Can were the only group that when they came over to support the album, if they toured, they sold less records. Because I don't know if you ever saw them in those days, but you had nothing to prepare. It was they only promoted the records by actually getting up on stage and playing something. It bore no resemblance to the record. And then now we get that, and now everyone, they're so fated now. But a
lot of what he did was sort of evangelism, was because he put out, J.J. Cale records, John Prine records, Buddy Guy, John Lee Hooker, people he really liked, didn't he? And just licensed in this country.
Yeah,
and that must have contributed to the success of J.J. Cale here.
I guess so. I think when he put the J.J. Cale album, I don't think he'd made an album for about 10 years.
Yeah, that was later, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And
because the thing I'd forgotten I never knew actually that this book reminded me of or told me about was just all the other stuff that Andrew Lauder did other than United Artists and so forth, which is, obviously Radar Records is involved in, and Silvertone and Demon.
Silvertone and Stiff he was involved with, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Demon and Edsel, he was a lot, I think, along with Ace Records. And to some extent, Charlie, although Charlie didn't have the quality control to their albums,
no.
He really, I think, championed the idea of catalogue and putting out reissues of albums that weren't just cheap throwaways. That where you paid attention to the best audio, the artwork was great. You had the sleeve notes. I mean, Demon, I think. Nobody's really done that before. And Andrew had actually been doing that. Actually, did that at United Artists.
Well, they're legendary masters at United Artists. They, Eddie Cochran and Fats Domino, and also that because there was a guy, Alan Warner, wasn't there? They used to do those things, the golden age of the Hollywood musical, and which were huge.
The one I remember most was the golden age of Hollywood, which had a pop-up of Busby Berkeley dancing.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah, wonderful.
But Andrew was doing stuff as well. I mean, Andrew did this, which was at United Artists.
Oh, right. Yes, Mercy Beat. Yes.
Mercy Beat. And this as well, Beat Merchant, which was kind of like an English nugget. So it was basically the non-Liverpool groups in the Beat era.
Yeah.
And I particularly love this record. I love the record because the sleeve is fantastic. But, I mean, the detail in terms of what a record shop looked like at that time.
It's fantastic.
But this was
the clothes.
This was the first album that I did the sleeve notes for and the research for. So
it's close to your heart.
It's close to my heart. You know, as is Andrew. You know, because Andrew was somebody that when I met, you know, when I first met him, I went into what is now about a legendary office he had at United Artists. So this was in 1970. And you walked in there, and the walls were just covered in psychedelic posters from the Avalon Ballroom.
Which people would never have seen in those days, would they? Or British people.
Yeah. But I think the thing I remember that really got to me was that, apart from the number of records he had, which was like totally jealous of, was there was a shelf with all these kind of reel-to-reel tapes, and you looked at them and looked down the spine, and it was like Quicksilver Messenger Service and Moby Grape and the Grateful Dead, the Charlatans, and these all unreleased live recordings by these bands, which is so commonplace now.
It's all. You think record store day and all that stuff would be inconceivable without what Andrew Lauder did.
Yeah,
you know, and all that stuff seems like quite commonplace now.
Yeah.
At the time, it wasn't. You know, because there were other record companies who just didn't do that sort of stuff at all. You know, records came out, they sold for 6 months, and then they just disappeared, didn't they? You know?
Yeah. No, he really did. You know, he was. It sounds corny to say that, you know, he was in it for the music, but and I think the best example I can think for that is that, you know, in 1971 when the first Little Feat album came out, and Warner Brothers, for some strange reason, chose not to release it.
Yeah.
He bought copies of it to give to people.
Yes.
You know, you go and see Andrew, and he would never try and hit you up to go and see his band or tell you how great one of his records. You know, he'd be talking to you about, about Little Feat or
yeah.
Townsend Bands or whatever. You know, he's quite remarkable, and he is completely unsung. You know,
he is, and he's
outside of the music business anyway. You know.
And it's part of the foundation for so much of the kind of culture of rock music now, isn't he? Of the idea of the independent labels and the samplers, and you know, he was a big part of all of that.
So he's not doing this interview, Mick. He's down in Devon, is he? Or
No, he moved. He moved to France in 2008.
Right.
No, he basically retired. He retired in, I think, around then, 2000 or so. And it's funny enough, he runs like a wine shop and sort of local produce shop.
Oh, this is perfect. This is what I imagine. With hat sash and the coloured coat playing on an old kind of psychedelic posters on the wall.
Yeah. No, well, he has the posters, but the thing is, he has a rack of, he has a kind of rack of records that he sells.
Yeah.
If you look through it, it's all kind of like John Lee Hooker and Jefferson Airplane and the hat sash.
Oh, that's so brilliant.
So people are going there to buy cheese, and they've got no idea that the man behind the counter is the
and they might,
Hawkwind.
They might flick through the record thinking they're some latest pop hit, but there'll be a Hawkwind album. You know.
Fantastic.
Well, if you don't know the story, you ought to get yourself acquainted with it. Happy Trails, Andrew Lauder's charmed live and high times in the record business. In the record business, yeah. It's fantastic tale.